Before the Rings of Power, there were the Silmarils. Before Sauron, there was his master Morgoth. Before Aragorn and Arwen, there was Beren and Luthien. Join us as we explore Tolkien and all the ages of Middle-earth with your hosts from theonering.com, Jonathan Watson and Michael Grumbine.
Hey everyone,
Hello.
welcome to Exploring Tolkien with me, Jonathan Watson, and him, Michael Grumbine, and together
Hello.
we are known as Michael Watson. Okay, this is a
very
funny
inside
thing.
joke. Yes.
A lot of you know we used to be called Window on the West. That was our original title of this podcast. Dan, who did the podcast with us up through December of last year, he is a producer at the Babylon Bee and has some input into the articles that appear on the site, and maybe even write some of them, because this article right here, which is sad, man faltering on his read through the Silmarillion in a year plan, falls through.
So many inside jokes in this. So
Yeah.
this is for our listeners. This segment. In these next few minutes, you all will have a good laugh in a way that not a single other human being in the world can have a laugh, because there are so many inside jokes from our last year and a half of podcasting in this article.
The first of which he decides to call the person who fails on his read through of the Silmarillion, Michael Watson, in honor of us.
And also, Michael Watson lives in Charleston, South Carolina.
Really? Oh, it's right
see
there at the front. Yeah, the very first tagline. It's Charleston. Oh my gosh. Well, clearly he means you than me. So how many times did you falter on your read through of the Silmarillion, Michael?
I always falter.
I faltered on my first read through of the Silmarillion. That is true. That is very true, because I read it right after Lord of the Rings, and like most people, I'm like, wait. This is not the same thing. So anyway, we'll throw that link. We'll throw that link in the show notes. Go ahead and click on it. It's down below in YouTube, and you can read it. It's a fun little read. Anyway, we're still going through Aldarion and Erendis, the Mariner's Wife, and in this episode, we are going to read through everything everything that's going to set up the story that is unfinished, in a way, if this is an unfinished tale. Although Mike is going to tell me, if I remember right, you're going to tell me why this is mostly not unfinished. However, we'll leave that for our last episode in 2 episodes. But in this episode, we're talking about the letter that Gil-galad has sent to Meneldur, the king of Númenor, and Aldarion's reaction to what Meneldur does because of that. And so we'll get into that. First, if you want to hear the additional questions that we're going to have, talking more about Aldarion's assistance to Gil-galad, and did they maybe provoke Sauron in any way? And we're going to also talk a little bit about pride, and how that's kind of a through line through a lot of what Tolkien writes. We're going to get into that in our extended portion of the podcast, and you can get that by becoming a member by going to theonering.com/member, where it's $4 a month, and the first month is free, and you can join us in our extended podcast. You can get it on all your podcast apps, and you can also watch it on YouTube. We post the links on a page on the website that's hidden only to our members, you got to log in. And then it's also in our Discord chat, our very special Discord chat, which you can get for free, but only the free parts. So if you go to the link below, click on that, you become a member of our Discord chat. And then if you want all the access to all the other channels in Discord, become a member at theonering.com/member. This is only about the 57th time I've said it, so I think it's about 100 times when people finally get it. So guys, if you're listening, just listen about another 40 or so times, and maybe you can join us in the extended podcast.
Or skip to our 150th episode or something.
Yeah, we're coming up on our 2-year anniversary in May. It's coming up fast. That's a lot of episodes. Broken 100.
Well, we have to do something for our 100th episode whenever that happens.
I better start figuring out which one that's going to be. It's hard to figure out because we do 2 episodes every week, the regular one and the members, and it screws up all the timing and everything. All right. Anyway, let's jump into Aldarion and Erendis, the Mariner's Wife, part 5 today. Yeah, part 5. Man, wow. And this starts off with Aldarion has left the letter he got from Gil-galad with his father. And Gil-galad reads it. And we find out what Aldarion has kind of actually been doing. Why it was so important. He was gone for, 4 years? Right? He left his wife and was gone 5 years. 5 years?
6 this time.
See, I'll get there eventually.
So he promised it was going to be 4 years or less before he left.
Okay.
And then he came back after 6. So yes, he is, and what is interesting to me about this is the point that we chose to stop last time and that we're starting this time is the letter from Gil-galad, and it is a total shift. So this is my contention. My contention is that today's episode is the shift in the story and also the end of the story as written, because we're going to read through to just what's left are fragments, and we're going to talk about the fragments next week. But as far as like a clean story, I believe this is the last episode about the full clean story, right, Jonathan?
You by clean, define clean. What do you mean by clean story? But
Well,
the story between Aldarion and Erendis. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, as written by Tolkien.
Oh, right. As written by Tolkien. Yes, the rest is put together by Christopher Tolkien through notes and other markings.
Right. So there are we get little speeches and things like that in the fragments that remain. But today's is the last of the continuous narrative, so to speak.
The prose, I guess you could say.
Right. And the rest of it, one has to imagine if Tolkien had ever finished it, he would have stitched it together using a lot of what we're going to talk about next week. But in this week, the last piece of continuous prose, I'll go with Jonathan's term there, we see actually, I'm going to argue, a complete shift. So up to this point, although Aldarion has had his reasons and he's not presented as totally crazy, he is nevertheless presented mostly as at fault, in my view. Like his father finds fault with him as the king and calls out his irresponsibility in his choices. He's shown to be almost kind of, in a way, kind of unfaithful by turning to the sea as a woman. He's struck by her beauty and romance. There's this romantic angle of the sea versus Erendis in his heart, and he keeps going back to the sea. And we're shown the pain it happens, and we're told that basically Erendis makes her own choices, and some of them are not great in the last reading. But nevertheless, most of the view has been of Aldarion essentially living this kind of a lifestyle that's not even really blessed by the Valar, because his Oyolaire is starts dying on his voyages, which never happens, and that's supposed to be a sign of the grace of the Valar. And so, but in this, starting with this letter that we get here, this is the turn, and I think this entire reading, basically, we're shown Aldarion, and he does something which is unusual in this story from either of our two main characters, which is he repents of what he's done. And Erendis does not. So this end of the story, or at least the continuous aspect of the story before the fragments, is, I think, an interesting turn, because Erendis's heart has been hardened, and she does not. She shifts not from here on out, and Aldarion does. And why does he shift, or why does Tolkien give us? And I'm reminded. So this is going to be my theme for this episode. There's a line that Gandalf speaks to Bilbo at the end of The Hobbit, and he says, and I'm gonna read it here. He says, "Surely you don't disbelieve the prophecies because you had a hand in bringing them about yourself. You don't really suppose, do you, that all your adventures and escapes were managed by mere luck, just for your sole benefit? You are a very fine person, Mr. Baggins, and I am very fond of you. But you are only quite a little fellow in a wide world, after all." And I view what's happening in this story right now, beginning with the letter, as that kind of reminder that for all of Aldarion and Erendis' drama that we have between the two of them, it remains, at the end of the day, drama between the two of them. And what's really happening, the important things in the wide world, are about to be laid out by Gil-galad. And we get a completely different view of Aldarion from the eyes of Gil-galad. Aldarion is not irresponsible in the eyes of Gil-galad. He is a great boon. He has been doing great work that has come to naught. It's been destroyed by Min and maybe by forces of the shadow that's rising in the east. But we are shown Aldarion as basically a piece of the overarching solution and the fight against evil and the legacy of Morgoth. And that's a completely different view of Aldarion that we've received up to this point. And the actions that Tar Meneldur takes show us that there is, in fact, a bigger picture here than just the love story and the failed love story between Aldarion and Erendis. There you go. That's my monologue. I think this passage that we're about to read, these few pages, are the turn in the story, where it's kind of like the zoom out function on a map. Been so zoomed in on this relationship between these two people and all the faults, and all of a sudden we zoom out. We're like, whoa, there's a bigger picture. And
two things.
Picture Aldarion has a different role to play.
Yeah. Two things struck me in reading this again for today. One, this is kind of the redemption of Aldarion, because we learn more about, like you were saying, about the greater world outside, and that he's the greatest elf friend to Gil-galad, and he's needed to actually fight against the evil. And two, the unfinished tale is called The Mariner's Wife, right? Yes. Because I've been thinking about this, but the tale should be called The Mariner. And so this here, if the unfinished tale part is called The Mariner's Wife, we get now the greater story here at the end that is unfinished. And that to me is my disappointment in writing this, because it's really about Aldarion. There is a relationship, and you can make him such an interesting, haunted character with what he did to his wife moving forward after this, and what happens with his daughter. And who knows, Tolkien changed Galadriel through the 50 years that he wrote her. And so in the same way, if he would have had time to rework this and to get into it deeper, I think there might have been a rework of what might have happened with some of the other characters. But this was his writing of these two and what happened, right? He wrote this in the early 60s, the early 1960s, 10 years after The Lord of the Rings was published. So the characters probably are what drove him to write it, but the greater story was out there for him to still discover about what would happen to it. And and in reading this time, that's what we kind of missed, because we see the dynamic character that Aldarion is. When he is shown grace, when he sees his father lay down the scepter out of seeing the need for his people, right? He has this sort of inner battle. There's a monologue that he deals with after. I don't want to jump too far forward, but there's a little bit of a monologue that he says to himself, is like, when either way may lead to evil, of what worth is choice? Let the Valar rule, and I will resign the scepter to Aldarion. Yet that is also a choice, for I know well which road he will take, unless Erendis ... But he has this. He's always fighting because he doesn't know what's best, but he realizes that there's a greater world out there, and Aldarion has been there. And when Aldarion sees that, that's when that's his turn, right? That's when he laughs whenever there is when he perceives great generosity, I think is the term that was used. And when he is given grace, that's when he turns. And that's when he becomes a different dynamic character in the story. And then the story kind of just ends eventually. That's what really sucks, right?
And I think the good point that you made, Jonathan, is that actually the story doesn't end. It ends, yes, because there's only fragments left. But clearly this was something that would have turned into something greater in Tolkien if Tolkien had the time. I use the analogy in one of our past two episodes, I can't remember which one. To me, Tolkien is a little bit like a farmer. I'll call him Johnny Appleseed in this one. He sort of throws seeds out in the field, and then in their own time, they spring up or die off, and eventually enough of them grow to be called an orchard. But really, he's just got all these trees growing at once at different rates and at different types and kinds. And
that's a great analogy.
This tree never came to full fruition, much like one of the trees inside this story. But anyway, I didn't actually think of that until I just said it. But so yes, that's how prepared I am for these episodes. I don't think through all the comments, but nevertheless, I really love this turn that he takes, because he moves it out of just the tragic love story, which has become quite sour and bitter, and it has become a tragedy. I do think it's quite interesting, but let me, before we talk more about that, let's read a passage or two maybe from the letter from Gil-galad that are really, I think, the most important. He first thanks Meneldur for the gift of his son, as he sees it, and acknowledges how much hope Aldarion brings to his heart.
And he acknowledges that he's the one that made him stay over long. He detained him. He literally says that.
Yep. And he says, and the reason why he is so, that Aldarion is so precious to him. Sorry, that wasn't meant to be a Gollum reference. In fact, it's the opposite. He has the source of real hope for Gil-galad. Gil-galad says, a new shadow arises in the east. It is no tyranny of evil men, as your son believes, but a servant of Morgoth is stirring, and evil things wake again. Each year it gains in strength, for most men are ripe to its purpose. Not far off is the day, I judge, when it will become too great for the Eldar unaided to withstand. Therefore, when I behold a tall ship of the kings of men, my heart is eased. And then he proceeds to ask Tar Meneldur to lend Gil-galad the strength of men, and in the coming fight in a variety of ways. He talks about specifics about the rise of these, and what's a couple interesting things about this passage that I just read was he has allowed Aldarion to believe something about the shadow in the east, which he now tells the truth to Aldarion's father. So Gil-galad finds great hope in Aldarion, but he also recognizes that he's not the king, and that some things are for the king's ears only. And so he's telling Tar Meneldur essentially about the rise of Sauron, a great servant of Morgoth. So we know that has to be Sauron. So that was one passage, and he then talks about a lot of the specifics that are happening and how basically Aldarion, hasn't been able to defend Vinyalande that he tried to secure at the mouth of the Gwathlo River,
which is right there.
So Jonathan's got a map up, pretty cool. And so we've got all these, and what I like about this map is it shows you the land that was underneath the ocean, that's now underneath the ocean.
Oh, I can see it all over here.
Yeah.
And they talk about how already we know this is right when, I think this is the first indication in any writing that Sauron is reestablishing himself in Mordor, essentially, because it's roundly held around the year 1000 is when he comes out. And they talk about how the gap in the gap of Rohan, except it's at that point it's called Kalanardon, which is right there. And so this is where they defended, and so you can see Vinyalande right here. That's where they are. Whereas the Mladris will be up here, but they're still up here in Eriador, and so this is the defense that they're talking about, defending Mordor from defending the elves from Mordor from Sauron, which, as you said, he lets him believe that he is a leader of men. Aldarion believes that this isn't Sauron yet, and so he does say, "It is no tyranny of evil men." You did read this, Michael. It is no tyranny of evil men, as your son believes, but a servant of Morgoth stirring. So even at this point, right, he doesn't believe that it's like Aldarion doesn't know the graveness, the gravity of the situation that they're in. That this whole land is going to be taken over by the evil, and that Vinyalande, which he's been trying to establish for years, is now that's the one thing they need to push them back. And as we discussed in the past, the elves aren't exactly a warring culture in the sense that they want to preserve, they want to retain, and Meneldur has that same kind of attitude. He falls into a discussion himself, and it feels almost Shakespearean to me, like one of the kings, speaking to himself about what must be done.
Right. It's an out loud inner monologue. Exactly. Very Shakespearean. And a couple of small details that I thought were funny and just shows the sort of the fertile nature of Tolkien's imagination, where he lets slip just these little details, like Gil-galad says that therefore, whenever I behold a tall ship of the kings of men, my heart is eased. Little does he know, there's only one tall ship of the kings of men. it's Hirelande,
Well,
and I mean I'm sure he's built other ships, but
don't you mean Turufanto?
that's right, the wooden whale,
the wooden
right?
whale.
But yes, and then the details, other little details, like why does Gil-galad value Aldarion's presence? Well, there's a lot of reasons, but one of them, he said, is because he speaks the languages of men, which Gil-galad doesn't know, basically. So so Aldarion's a bit of a linguist as well, as in his travels he picks up on a bunch of languages, apparently, which we're never told. But I mean, what else would we expect from a protagonist in a philologist's story like Tolkien? So of course he's going to pick up various languages. But let's shift to that inner monologue. So this letter from Gil-galad from one king to another entirely shifts the mindset of Tar Meneldur, and it throws him into a kind of existential crisis, because basically up to this point we've only seen Tar Meneldur as the corrective father, like we were told that he liked to gaze at the stars early on, and then he's entirely, since the entire story up to this point has been about the relationship now failed between Aldarion and Erendis, then Tar Meneldur is going to has been playing the role of the corrective father to his son, and so now there's a complete shift. And now basically, like the way I read it, Tar Meneldur has realized that he's not the king for this moment. Like he's, in fact, the kind of king he is the king of a peaceful people that have had no, and we know this, right? Because we know that apparently only Aldarion knows how to plant forests for lumber, because like the Númenorians were known as this, they're going to become known as the greatest seafaring race ever to exist in Middle Earth, and yet they don't even know how to plant or care enough to plant a forest for the lumber for ships. Aldarion is the one that sparks all this. He, in fact, is like the starting point of Númenor as this great island nation, this great maritime power. Now, in his own time, it doesn't come to that fruition, but he's the one that begins it. And in this speech that Tar Meneldur gives, as you were saying, Jonathan, to himself, he lays out what's supposed to happen here. What am I going to do? And he plays out what's going to happen, because Gil-galad is telling him there's a war coming, and you're the king, so help me out. One king to another. And so Tar Meneldur plays out the scenario. He's like, what am I going to do? To prepare for war or let be? He says, to prepare for war, which is yet only guessed, train craftsmen and tillers in the midst of peace for blood spilling in battle, put iron in the hands of greedy captains who will love only conquest and count the slain as their glory. Will they say to Eru, at least your enemies were among them, among the slain? So he presents one extreme. It's like, if I train my people for battle, we're going to have a bunch of bloodthirsty warriors who excuse their bloodthirstiness by telling Eru. And interesting, because as we know, the Númenorians are the only people that pray directly to Eru amongst the races of men. But he's so they turn their excuse to God is going to be, well, I slew a lot of people, but there were your enemies among them, so that makes my bloodshed all okay. And then he gives the other extreme. He goes, or to fold hands while friends die unjustly. Let men live in blind peace until the ravisher is at the gate. What then will they do? Match naked hands against iron and die in vain, or flee, leaving the cries of women behind them? Will they say to Eru, at least I spilled no blood? So he's giving it's fascinating to me, because he's a king of peace, and the two potential extremes that happen when you prepare for war or ignore war are before him, and he wisely lays out these things are the two extremes, and funnily enough, the last sentence of each extreme is an excuse to God about why their extremist path, whether warmonger extremist or pacifist extremist, is going to be, they're going to make excuses. And he says, basically, I don't have it in me to lead my people at this time. So guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to make my son king. Ta-da!
Yeah. Well, it's like after 1,000 years of peace, right? They've had 1,000 years of peace on this island. King has had to worry about war. They haven't had to worry about planting trees, building ships. Everything's been honky-dory. They've got some nice visitors from the West every once in a while that come to their parties.
Good point.
And now he's the first guy who has this was asked in a previous extended edition where I think it was last week, where he said, since there was no real constitution for the kings, right? There was no, not constitution in like internal fortitude, but constitution in the sense of like legal rules, like rules to follow in these sorts of cases. They hadn't experienced this at all. There was no blueprint for him to say, like, in this situation, this is what I was taught from the kings that came before me, because it never had existed.
Right. No precedent. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And part of me also, when reading this, when he says, at least your enemies were amongst them, as one excuse, or at least I spill no blood as the other excuse, he says, Aldarion, you take the hard decision. I'm not even going to deal with it anymore. Which I feel, okay, a little bit, he's a little bit of a cop out, and probably a wise decision in the sense that he doesn't know what's going on over there, but also in the fact that like his immediate reaction is like, I don't even want to make the decision. I don't even want to move that far forward into what I don't know.
So that's the question, though, isn't it? So that's one way to read
is.
it. Another way to read it is, and this is not very clickbaitable, but this is a potential way to read it is, Tar Meneldur is actually wise, and he realizes, I do not have this within me. I'm not the right man for this job, and my son is. He clearly is. The Elven and High King has told me he is. He's this great man, and he's the hope of their people. And so,
isn't it funny though? Go ahead.
Yeah. So I'm just saying there's a wisdom in what he says. And he, at the end of his speech, he actually says something, he comments on what we are reading about, which is the story of Aldarion Erendis. He then turns to Erendis and realizes basically in no uncertain terms that's a failed relationship. But he has basically, he puts Erendis in one of those two extremist camps that he talked about, but probably not for the reason that the extremist turns to Eru and says, "At least I spilt no blood." But she would have fallen into the pacifist camp, and he criticizes her to himself. He said, "I know." He says, "I know her choice, even were she to listen long enough to understand." So little shade thrown at her that way, like she's not even going to listen.
She doesn't want to hear it out.
She doesn't want to hear anything. For her heart has no wings beyond Númenor, and she has no guess of the cost. If her choice should lead to death in her own time, she would die bravely. But what will she do with life and other wills? The Valar themselves, even as I, must wait to discover. Sadly, of course, we don't get to discover much of anything about Erendis. There's a little bit in the fragments, but not much. So basically, he says, look, she is also not a person. He's saying essentially, like me, she's not a person for this time or this decision either. And
her heart, and like I said, it's that 1,000 years of peace, right? They were both. Numenor was their whole world. Nobody had really traveled beyond it other than Aldarion and Aldarion's uncle, and so no one had it. But the decision to relinquish the throne to Aldarion, you can say like he wasn't prepared for that, but you could also say Aldarion wasn't prepared to defend Númenor because he doesn't. His heart was in Númenor even at that point, and he hadn't gone through what even other kings had gone through in order to prepare them for the throne. Not that I have exact evidence for that, but in his interactions with his father, right? His father stripped him of his titles. He berated him to go do what he needed to with his wife, and he couldn't make the right choices there either. So what kind of a king will Aldarion? Well, we'll really truly find out. But it's I mean, there's so much black and white. I'm totally joking about the black and white in Tolkien. This is a nice gray area where you're not sure if it's the wisest decision, and maybe it's like a 51-49 decision. This I have to fall on just that little bit more. Is that what's important? Is what's going on over there? Because like Gil-galad said, the darkness that is come is filled with hatred for us, but it hates you no less, which we will eventually learn when we realize how much Sauron actually hates the Númenorians because of what they did to Morgoth. And they have been not just a splinter in his side, a spear. Well, that's a really bad analogy, a spear in his side. They've been an axe in his head for a while.
Well, actually, the spear, Aegilos, Gil-galad's going to put a spear in his side before the end anyway. But anyway, so there's then follows a very interesting discussion, which looks like it's going to start out the way so many discussions have between Tar Meneldur and his son, where Aldarion returns back to the capital and then appears before has his house destroyed, levels his house, except the one white tree, which is only 12 feet tall. It was, many years at this point. How many years?
was
like 21 years, something like that. That before, since he was given
at their wedding, right? Has it been that long since their wedding? No,
I think.
I
Well,
think it's
15
18
years.
Is it 15?
Oh no, you're right, because his daughter was 4 when he left, right?
Yeah, I think it was 12. They were married there 12 years. I want to say. Is that? I'm just going off memory now. I'm not looking up any timelines.
Okay,
and then
so they were married, given the tree. 2 years later, the daughter was born. That's 2 years. He leaves when his daughter's 4, so that's 6 years. He returns 6 years later, or 5 years later. Maybe it was the 6th year that he returned, so 5 years later. So that's 11 years. So it's 11 or 12 years, one of the two.
Okay. Okay.
And so it's 12 years, and it's 12 feet tall. It's only grown a foot a year. I mean, it started out as a sapling. So,
but he sees it differently now too.
Yep.
Not just as wood. He saw that it was in itself beautiful for the first time. It was straight, slender, youthful, and budded with winter flowers upon upheld branches pointing to the sky. It recalled to him his daughter.
Right.
Interesting. Unbending, slim, slender, pointing at the sky. I will also call you on Kalime. May you and she stand so in long life, unbent by wind or will, and unclipped.
Interesting, especially considering the speech that we're going to find from one of the fragments that Erendis gives to her daughter about being unbending. So it's fascinating that they both, in a way, wish the same for their daughter, although very different, as we'll find. So in any case, Aldarion goes before the king, and they have what is going to sounds like it's going to be one of their doesn't end well discussions, because it starts with Tar Meneldur criticizing his son for many things, not telling him more about what he's been doing out in the world, for one, and the gravity of it. And then, of course, his behavior towards his wife, although Aldarion shoots back that he actually did tell Erendis much more than he told the king about his travels, but she just didn't care. And so it looks like there's going to be, and in fact, we're told that Aldarion, what the quote is, he had braced himself to face the king's anger, which willfully he had endeavored to kindle. So Aldarion was trying to provoke the king in this conversation so that he could just leave, because that's what he's going to do. Is he asks permission to leave, and Tar Meneldur, before telling him he's going to hand over the scepter, tells him, "Nope, you can't leave," which fires up. Aldarion's he's basically going into a rage at this point, but then I don't want to call it you catastrophe, because it's a choice from people, but it's the turn in the story comes, and the moment when, like Erendis, Aldarion is given a chance to repent of his willful ways, and he chooses to do so because his father gives up the scepter and reads the decree wherein he's going to hand over the throne to his son. And after that, we see Aldarion, stood for a moment in amaze, and then he said, the passage that I just read about what his intention was. Now he stood confounded. Then, as one swept from his feet by a sudden wind from a quarter unexpected, he fell to his knees before his father. But after a moment, he raised his bowed head and laughed. So he always did when he heard of any deed of great generosity, for it gladdened his heart. "Father," he said, "ask the king to forget my insolence to him, for he is a great king, and his humility sets him far above my pride. I am conquered. I submit myself wholly. That such a king should resign the scepter while in vigor and wisdom is not to be thought." "Yet so it is resolved," said Meneldur. "The council shall be summoned forthwith." So there's this against in the tower, the heights of his pride, and he's about to basically say screw you to his father and leave the Númenor, probably forever, maybe, and bring the wrath of the king upon him. He's leveled, and he falls to his knees, leveled physically too, he falls to his knees, and he levels his pride, and he laughs at himself, and he laughs in the joy of the generosity of his father, and he says, "I submit myself wholly, I am conquered." And so we have here Aldarion admitting his pride, admitting that he was in the wrong, admitting that he needs to be conquered by his father and his generosity. And it really is, like you said, Jonathan, an act of redemption from a narrative perspective.
Yeah, and like you said, it hadn't occurred to me that it is, to Aldarion, it is a catastrophic moment. It is an unexpected turn to him, and that unexpected turn turns him. It changes him, and I think it's not punishment, it's not time, it's unexpected goodwill that changes his heart. Which I would say that even with in what we learned of his relationship with Erendis, that never occurred. Nobody sacrificed for each other in their relationship, and here we see that Tar Meneldur is sacrificing for the good of Númenor, which Aldarion called a misenchanted isle of daydreams where women in their insolence would have men cringe, which I found really interesting, harsh. And like, he's like, okay, this is now the land I have to defend. But, you know, a lot of that is said in his heated anger, and not necessarily as what he would leave, because that's the way that he's got to deal with salty pirates all day long on his boat. So I'm sure he brooks no ill will.
Well, and now we get to the last page, and what's interesting about this is, what is Erendis's reaction? So Erendis has sent a message saying, basically, come and bring Ankali with you. Come to the capital. It's time. You know, there's going to be a change in kingship, and you know, you need to be here. And her response back,
man,
she has a very different reaction from Aldarion. Her reaction is to dig herself in deeper. You know, in a way, it reminds me of the Gollum reaction versus the Sam reaction to the ring. So it's the great temptation, and finally, in the end, Sam passes and Gollum does not. And you know, in each of their trials, and so she says, you know, basically, she just reads it all as an attack on her. He is swift to strike, she thought, so I should have foreseen. He will strip me of all, but myself he shall not command, though it be by the mouth of his father. And then she asks leave. She says, I'll send down Ankali, but leave me alone, and so I could stay here basically forever. Which is a very powerful, it's very interesting if you think about it, because Ankali is her only daughter, so her only thing in the world. You would think that, like, you know, even if she was in the throes of, like, you know, the focus on the hatred, she has great hatred of men, we're told explicitly. She hates, of course, she's going to hate her husband. And now, you know, but she would rather have her daughter be taken from her and not go with her daughter and stay by herself alone than be commanded by someone else, by specifically Aldarion, apparently. But
let's remember, like, she said that she would be there for her daughter as long as her daughter loved her. And so it wasn't her love for her daughter. It was totally conditional. Like, and she grew in this soil of distrust for so long that the very first thing that she says when she reads the proclamation or hears of the proclamation, when news came to her, she read a rebuke by the king, not just like this was against her. Like, everything is against her. The sea was against her. Aldarion was against her. Her daughter's probably now again. Like, she is the victim in all of this too. And not that Tolkien was writing from that, but it's a very real moment for so many who are in that position. Like, everyone's out to get you, and that's the world that she lives in.
I have a close family member that's the truth with. I watched over the years it happened to him, where everything became about him, and everything that happened was through the lens of, am I right or am I wronged or not? And usually it's, yes, I was wronged in some way. And so this is very familiar. This is a real theme that can happen to the warping of the human heart, where it becomes so really narcissistic that it everything is viewed as a slight against you. And she's even willing to give up her daughter and not see her except whatever, very occasionally, when, you know, in order so that she just so that she not be, you know, told what to do by someone she hates now. Like, that is such a twisting of one's responsibility that it's shocking. And then Aldarion's reaction to it is I think really interesting. Aldarion, of course, is still angry. His relationship is ruined with her, But his father, when the response comes back, says, "Doubtless you are grieved, but for what else did you hope?" And Aldarion responds and says to his father, "Not for this, at least," said Aldarion. "Is far below my hope of her. She has dwindled, and if I have wrought this, then black is my blame. But do the large shrink in adversity? This was not the way, not even in hate or revenge. She should have demanded that a great house be prepared for her, called for a queen's escort, and come back to Armenelos with her beauty adorned royally, with a star on her brow. Then well nigh all the Isle of Númenor she might have bewitched to her part, and made me seem madman and churl. The valor be my witness. I would rather have it have had it so. Rather a beautiful queen to thwart me and flout me than freedom to rule, while the lady Elistirne falls down dim into her own twilight." It's a really powerful statement.
It is. And what we need to realize is that what she wrote to Meneldur was either was I feel like it was a false plea for pity. Um, she writes that, "I beg that you will consider her years and calling me, and see to it that she is lodged in quiet. For myself, I pray you excuse me. I learned that my house in Armenelos has been destroyed, and I would not at this time willingly be a guest, least of all upon a house ship among mariners. Here then, permit me to remain in my solitude, unless it be the king's will also to take back this house." And so, and it says it missed the mark in Tarmeneldur's heart. And I think she was seeking for some sort of like, look at how you've wronged me. Look at how you've made me into you've created this bitter person because of all the things that have been done to me. And I think that's the mark that missed its heart. And that's where Aldarion says, "I wanted a queen to thwart me. I don't want a pitiful creature anymore." Right. And that's what she's become all by herself in her lonesome, not even doting, dealing with her daughter, and living a life that is not worthy of a queen at all. Like he was hoping she would grab onto the royalty that she really is now. And she's like, "Nope, I'm just going to sink deeper into this darkness."
Right. I do really think you chose the right word. She is a pitiable creature. And this is what turning inward on oneself does. And again, I draw back to the example. And I'm not trying to throw dirt on her by comparing her to Gollum in this case, but there's a similar aspect. It's pity that stays Bilbo's hand with Gollum. Gollum's a pitiable creature. He's completely self-absorbed. Erendis is not that far gone, but compared to the heights that she should have been, as pointed out by Aldarion, she has fallen greatly, and she just seeks, as you said, to try to the pity angle to get what she wants, and it misses the mark with Tarmeneldor, because of course Tarmeneldor is now thinking of the bigger picture and what's more important for the people as a whole. And he's about to hand over the kingship to his son. And so, it's a very sad ending, and that's the end of the continuous narrative that we have of this story. And next week we'll talk about the fragments.
For good or ill, it ends essentially on the line of like, if she doesn't want to live among my people, my mariners, then I may be excused the dislike of a sheep farm among serving women. So the contrast between the two is made there right at the end again. That like, look, you won't come to me on the mariner ship, and I won't come to you in the middle of Marier, right? And we're going to live our separate lives this way. But he will not have his daughter so schooled. She'll choose by notch, and we'll find out what happens.
Right. He focuses on the daughter at the end.
Yeah.
But even so, like the line that you gave, it is a good apt contrast between the two. But it also shows that there's a just this deep wounding in both of their hearts, and
he's not letting it go. Still, he's still not letting it go.
He's still not letting it go. And although he is shown to be the better person in that regard, with regard to the choices of virtue, because he humbles himself at the end when given a chance completely, that is still, he still has bitterness in his heart towards his wife. It's still a tragic story, love story.
Yeah, and that's why I think this is the further course of the narrative, the unfinished part, so to speak, is the mariner, not the mariner's wife, essentially moving forward, or made the mariner and his daughter. So we'll read that next week, all y'all, and then maybe we'll do one more episode after that, kind of spitballing what we think could have happened, where the story might have been taken if Tolkien had had time to go back to it, to go back to those seeds that he scattered and watch them grow and prune them and shear them and replant them and do all the sorts of things that he did when he wrote over the 60 years, nearly 60 years of diving into Middle Earth.
Yeah, and
So
tune in next week too, as well, for a Galadriel reference. One of the few.
Oh, yes, Galadriel, the leader of the Northern armies, as we find out. Right?
Shut up!
I have to. Sorry.
Oh,
Rings of Power. It's been a year and a half, right? And we probably won't get another Rings of Power show for another year. There's been no news on that thing. Is like dead as a doornail right now. I don't know what they're doing. I think they have to commit to 5 years, or else they get some sort of penalty. They have to give back a ton of money, or like pay even more. I don't know. I think there's a penalty for not doing all 5 seasons. Although the penalty is on us for actually doing 5 seasons. We're the ones that suffer.
We received a penalty from having it in the first place. But you know, and the showrunners have been demoted, and there's all kinds of drama. Anyway,
we'll find out more. More to come. All right, guys, we're going to jump into our extended portion. We're going to ask and answer some of the questions there. I hope you join us there. Become a member at thewondering.com/member and check it out for a month. It's free.
Bye-bye, freeloaders.
See y'all later.